Welcome back to the Museum of Celebs. You know, where we like to dig into the lives of some of the most, fascinating figures. And today, we are going to be opening up the vault on a guy who's practically a museum unto himself, Donald John Trump. Real estate mogul, reality TV star, and the 45th President of the United States. But I tell you, there's way more to this story than just the headlines and sound bites. This guy's journey is a serious roller coaster ride, from inheriting this huge real estate empire to almost losing it all, to captivating the world with that you're fired. Let's start at the beginning. Trump, born in Queens, New York in 1946. Didn't exactly start from scratch. His dad, Fred Trump, already had a pretty substantial real estate business. But here's the thing, young Donald, he didn't just come from that inheritance. Yeah. He really dove headfirst into that family business. And you know what he did? He took this struggling Commodore Hotel and he transformed it into the Grand Hyatt, which was this seriously swanky hotel that really put him on the map in New York real estate. That's a tough world. And he made his mark. What does this satisfy? Casinos, golf courses. He even started slapping his name on everything, from steaks to cologne. This was the era of Trump Tower, a true symbol of his ambition and, his love for all things gold. But you know what they say, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And Trump's foray into the airline industry with Trump Shuttle, it was a total nosedive. He ended up having to sell it off. Right. And then the 1990s hit. Things got really rocky for his empire. Those over-leveraged casinos in Atlantic City, they didn't exactly hit the jackpot. He was hit with multiple bankruptcies, which forced him to restructure and claw his way back to financial stability. You might think that those setbacks would have humbled the guy, but not a chance. Trump's resilience is almost legendary. It's like every time he stumbled, he bounced back twice as hard. Never afraid of a challenge, never afraid of risk. And that brings us to the moment that really changed everything. His totally unexpected jump from the boardroom to the TV screen. In 2004, The Apprentice premiered. And did you remember that? That boardroom, the intense challenges, those dramatic firings. It was reality TV gold. And it transformed Trump into a household name. And that catchphrase, "You're fired," it became a part of the culture. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a celebrity, a master of entertainment and branding. And little did we know, it was all a prelude to an even bigger stage. The political arena was calling, and Trump, never one to shy away from the spotlight, was about to answer. Okay, so Trump's in the White House. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some guy sitting behind the resolute desk. This was a constant barrage of executive orders, tweets that would set the world on fire, and pronouncements that kept everyone guessing what was going to happen next. He didn't waste any time pushing his agenda. He rolled back regulations, slashed taxes, and started stacking the federal courts with conservative judges. His supporters, they loved it. They praised him as a man of action, like a bulldozer taking on the swamp, putting America first. But his critics, they were freaking out. They saw him as a wrecking ball, swinging at democracy, a demagogue tearing the country apart. And protests erupted across the nation, fueled by his rhetoric and his policies, which they saw as discriminatory and really harmful. America felt more divided than ever, split right down the middle. And Trump was standing right there, smack dab in the center of the storm. And then there were the scandals. Remember the Mueller investigation? That thing dragged on for almost 2 years, digging into Russian interference in the 2016 election, and it turned Trump's world upside down. Indictments and convictions raining down on his associates like confetti. Now, the investigation didn't actually find proof that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia, but it did unearth all these instances where Trump tried to obstruct the investigation, which, just fueled the impeachment fire that the Democrats were already fanning. That whole impeachment saga is like a national soap opera, culminating in this dramatic Senate trial. Trump, of course, was acquitted by the Republican-controlled Senate, but I think the damage was already done. The country was a powder keg of partisan bitterness, and that acquittal just tossed a lit match on the whole mess. But then something happened that nobody really saw coming. A global pandemic. 2020 rolls around. COVID-19 hits the world like a ton of bricks, and life as we knew it came to a screeching halt. And Trump's response, well, let's just say it was unconventional. He downplayed the virus at first, called it a hoax, claimed it would just magically disappear, even compared it to the flu, pushed back against masks and lockdowns, argued they'd wreck the economy and trample on people's freedom. And remember those press conferences? He would tout unproven treatments like hydroxychloroquine. He even floated the idea of injecting disinfectants. Medical experts were losing their minds. And meanwhile, the virus kept spreading, the death toll kept rising, and Trump's approval ratings, they took a nosedive. His handling of the pandemic became the defining issue in the 2020 election, where he went head-to-head with Joe Biden. Biden, on the other hand, campaigned on empathy, competence, and listening to the scientists. It was a pretty stark contrast to Trump, whose pandemic response felt, chaotic, inconsistent. and frankly, driven more by politics than public health. That election, oh boy, it was a nail-biter. Both sides were slinging accusations of voter fraud left and right, trying to suppress votes any way they could. It got really ugly. Fast, in the end, Biden squeaked out a victory. He took both the popular vote and the Electoral College. But Trump, he wouldn't concede. He doubled down, claimed the election was stolen, even though there wasn't really a shred of evidence to back it up. Courts tossed out his lawsuits. Election officials debunked his claims. But his supporters, they clung to the belief that the election was rigged. And that's where things took a really dark turn. Remember January 6, 2021? A mob of Trump supporters, fired up by his rhetoric and convinced that the election was stolen, stormed the U.S. Capitol. They were trying to stop Congress from certifying Biden's win, and they weren't messing around. They smashed through barricades, clashed with police, trashed offices. I mean, lawmakers were running for their lives. It was chaos. A full-blown assault on American democracy. The first time since the Civil War that the Capitol had been breached like that. The world watched in disbelief. This was America, the beacon of democracy. It was falling apart right before our eyes. In the aftermath, Trump was impeached by the House for inciting an insurrection. He was acquitted by the Senate again. But the stain of January 6th, that dark cloud, still hanging over him, the Trump presidency, it was a roller coaster, to say the least. It was a time of triumphs, scandals, division, and a pandemic that turned the world upside down. But even though he left office, his story didn't end there. He still had plenty of fight left in him, and his influence on American politics was far from over. Okay, so we've talked about Trump's rise to power, his chaotic presidency, that whole January 6th thing. But to really get this guy, we got to talk about the stuff that made people love him, hate him, you name it. His views on race, immigration, gender. It's been a lightning rod from the get-go. Remember that campaign launch back in 2015? He called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. Yeah. And it really set the tone for his whole approach to immigration. Building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, that was his big promise, and he went hard on immigration policy. Travel bans on people from Muslim-majority countries, separating families at the border, stuff that drew a ton of criticism from human rights groups. But his supporters, they loved it. They thought immigration was like this threat to America, and Trump was the only one who could fix it. But a lot of people felt like it was just cruel and inhumane, and not what America was supposed to be about. Then there's race. I mean, Trump has said some things that made a lot of people cringe, like when he said there were very fine people on both sides of that white supremacist rally in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
And his response to the Black Lives Matter movement, well, yeah, let's just say he wasn't exactly on board. He called them thugs, dismissed the whole movement as Marxist, even sent federal troops to crack down on protests.
Well.
And gender, yeah, that was a minefield too. Multiple women accused him of sexual assault and harassment, though he denied everything. And he's made a lot of sexist and misogynistic remarks over the years. And policies like trying to restrict abortion and contraception, I mean, a lot of people saw that as a direct attack on women's rights. The point is, Trump's words and actions on these issues, they had a real impact. They kind of emboldened some pretty nasty groups, created this atmosphere of fear and hostility towards minorities, immigrants, and it made it almost impossible to even have a conversation about anything. His legacy on these issues, well, it's messy, controversial, and honestly, it's probably going to be debated for years to come. Some people defend him, say he was just telling it like it is, that his policies were tough but necessary. Others say he was deliberately stirring up division, playing to his base, and enacting policies that really hurt the most vulnerable people. But one thing's for sure, Trump changed the conversation on these issues, whether you liked it or not. And those changes, they're still rippling through America today. And we can't talk about Trump without talking about the media. I mean, Trump and the press. Total train wreck from the beginning. He's always had this weird love-hate relationship with them going back to his New York days. He called them fake news, the enemy of the people, and constantly accused them of being biased against him. And during his presidency, those attacks went into overdrive. He'd rip into reporters at press conferences, call out specific journalists by name, and use Twitter to just trash any news outlet that dared to criticize him. He'd deny any negative story, even if it was backed up with facts. And this constant barrage, it had a real effect. People started distrusting the media even more. Reporters had a harder time doing their jobs, and misinformation just spread like crazy. Journalists started getting threats, harassment from Trump supporters. And it created this climate of fear and intimidation. It was all part of Trump's playbook. He saw the media as the enemy, an obstacle to getting what he wanted. He didn't care about a free press. He just wanted to control the narrative. Yeah. And his approach to the media, it was a bad look for America. And it gave cover to dictators around the world who were doing the same thing, silencing their critics, cracking down on anyone who disagreed with them. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Donald Trump, let's take a step back and think about what we've learned. This guy's been a businessman, a reality TV star,
a president and a constant source of controversy. He's like this walking contradiction, a master of branding who filed for bankruptcy multiple times, a self-proclaimed billionaire who dodged taxes, a champion of the working class who hung out with billionaires. He could charm your pants off one minute and insult you the next. He's left this giant messy footprint on American politics and society,
and it's going to take us a long time to figure out what it all means. But here's the thing. Whether you love him or hate him, you can't deny that he's changed the game. He's tapped into something deep in the American psyche, something that's been brewing for a while, this distrust of institutions, this anger at the elites, this longing for a simpler time. And whether he runs for president again or not, that something isn't going away anytime soon. So there you have it, the Donald Trump exhibit at the Museum of Celebs, a story of ambition, controversy, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Thanks for joining me on this wild ride. Until next time, keep exploring the lives of those fascinating figures who shaped our world, for better or for worse.